This episode is brought to you by Clever Consult. To my fellow medical specialists, you need more than just an AI scribe. Imagine walking into a patient's room where 80% of your clinical note is already completed before you even begin. Canadian gastroenterologist Dr. Kyle Fertinsky found that even with the latest tools, he was still buried in repetitive, low-level tasks. So, he created Clever Consult, the first and only AI platform built exclusively for specialists. Clever Consult has the best-in-class document reviewer built for your specialty. They even have a customizable questionnaire where patient responses can integrate directly into your clinical note. Plus, it comes with the first-ever specialty-trained AI scribe. Clever Consult is 100% Canadian and fully compliant with all privacy standards. Join hundreds of specialists already saving more than 5 hours a week using Clever Consult. To get your 14-day trial started, visit cleverconsult.ai and tell them the Beyond MD podcast sent you. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 112 of the Beyond MD podcast. Today I'm excited to host one of our very own, Dr. Gwynn Curran-Sills, and today's conversation is going to focus on real estate, intergenerational wealth, and also lessons through a sabbatical. So Gwynn works in a community emergency department in Southern Ontario and has a research focus in wilderness, disaster, and sports medicine. He has a strong interest in personal finance that revolves around the stewardship of wealth through an intergenerational lens. Gwynn has a keen interest in real assets and in particular has grown a multi-family real estate portfolio in Alberta. He and his family recently spent a year living in Valencia, Spain while he was on sabbatical. So with that, please enjoy my conversation with Gwynn Curran-Sills. So Gwynn, I want to first of all welcome you to the show. I had the pleasure of connecting with you in person. I believe it was almost 3 years ago at a conference. And since then, we've had more chances to talk. We've enjoyed a really nice brunch together. And I've just seen you as somebody who is very insightful when it comes to personal finance and very well thought out. And I think you're going to have some perspectives that are going to be useful for everyone today. So first of all, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me. I think one thing I just want to acknowledge up front, it's been amazing to see your journey through Beyond MD. I've been listening right from the beginning and I haven't missed an episode. I think it's also really important to say this service that you provide is, I think, second to none when it comes to what's available for us as physicians within the country. And I think you've done a lovely job. And the how you've curated all the different people that you've brought on has been lovely to sort of see. These are amazing guests. And so I feel truly honored that you think I will have something useful to say to your community and your audience. So I appreciate the invite.
Gwynn, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Thank you for lifting me up on this Tuesday. That's so kind of you to say all that. And a big thank you for me for supporting me in the show from day one. I can't tell you how much that means to me. So, Gwynn, why don't we start things off by you taking a moment to just give us a quick 30,000-foot view snapshot of who you are?
Yeah. So I think these days I wear a couple of different hats. So I've got a clinical hat. I'm an emerge physician, CCFP-EM trained. I work at a satellite campus for a community hospital here in Southern Ontario. Been doing that now for about 8 years after we relocated back from Alberta. And I really enjoy the group that I work with. It's a fantastic little space. Then the other hat, I guess, would be, probably in residency, I developed a really interest or keen interest in research. And I've got a couple of different areas. So wilderness medicine, a little bit of disaster medicine and combative sports that I like to dabble in. That has definitely taken a backseat with the arrival of kids. And probably the past 3-4 years, I haven't been as active as I would like to be, but I think that's turning a corner and hopefully I'm going to have another paper out relatively soon, which will be really nice. And then the other piece would be, or I guess the other job that I have is I've developed a real estate portfolio for our family and some close friends. We've got about 199 units under our belt these days. It probably purchase-wise, maybe about $23 million worth of assets. And once they've been all stabilized and reappraised, they're probably going to be in the $30 million range. So we've been working really hard to develop that over the past few years and had a lot of fun doing so too. And then the last hat would be being a dad and just being part of a growing family. We've got 2 small kids, 7 and 8. and life is crazy. All the time crazy. And I think one of your other guests a little while ago had mentioned this idea of just being so, as much work as you put in, there's always so much uncertainty when it comes to being a parent. And I think I feel that quite a lot. Not sure if we're doing the right things because it's all just an experiment.
Yep. Parenting is one of those journeys, Gwynn, that I tell people nothing can prepare you for it. You can read every book there is on this, but until you get your feet dirty and get going, that's the ultimate test. So interesting research projects, by the way, that you mentioned. I wanted to ask you, though, with regards to your interest in financial literacy and specifically real estate, how did this all come to be?
Yeah, so my parents, I would say, they're the sort of the neatest for all of this. I would consider myself like a second generation real estate investor. We're an immigrant family from Ireland. We came here at the end of the 80s, so 87. And we settled in Ontario in Etobicoke. And probably about 10 years after we got to Canada, my parents bought their first real estate property and then kind of grew their portfolio to about 9 units within sort of Southern Ontario. And then that was sort of in late high school, early university for me. And my parents dragged me along kicking and screaming to all the work that goes along with that. The typical things like the repairs, the interviewing tenants, balancing books and all that kind of jazz. So it's really been something that, family business, I think is how I'd phrase it.
Now, back in Ireland, were your parents also investing in real estate there? Was that an interest that carried on over from Ireland?
No, they, no, although my dad was quite passionate about it, I would say no, it didn't come across from there. So there was a relatively large recession that went on in Ireland back in the mid 80s. And so my dad had worked in Libya for a couple of years before we came over. So I think maybe us having left Ireland, maybe losing sort of the family home that we had there, maybe that was sort of part of the history that kind of led into wanting to have something a bit more permanent that they could hold on to.
Okay. It's interesting. So it sounds like you just through your parents' journey by following them, maybe learning through osmosis, you started to pick up on real estate. And I can tell you that when I started getting interested in real estate investing, this started for me around 6 or 7 years ago. And I would drag the kids out with me whenever I wanted to inspect a property. And there came a point, Gwynn, whenever I mentioned the word property, I was like, guys, let's go check something out. They would just shudder. They'd be like, Dad, like again, this is so boring. Like we hate coming to check out properties with you. But I still think that in those moments, there are things for all of us to learn. The kids they absorb so much. And I think there's something there for everybody. But when we last met, Gwynn, you told me that you took quite a bit of time to dig into what made the most sense when it came to investing in real estate. First, in terms of what types of properties and then where in Canada. And then I believe that your investigations, and this is where I want to reiterate, I think you're very well thought out and you research things carefully, but your investigations led you to arrive at the conclusion that going to Western Canada, perhaps, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and focusing more of your efforts there would probably be a wiser long-term play. Can you talk to us about that and how you came to those conclusions?
Yeah. So maybe before I even jump into that, something else I would probably say is, I think this is true of probably most areas of investing. I kind of have this view that there's a retail investor and then there's a professional investor. And these terms aren't used, or in my mind, to be pejorative or anything of that nature, but it's just, I think it's the level of interest that people have. And so when I envision a retail investor, it's somebody who's maybe not as immersed, maybe it doesn't become sort of a main focus for them, but they're interested in a particular area. Professional investor is somebody that's sort of full-time job, like they're attending conferences and things of that nature and sort of just staying up to speed on what's going on. And I think my parents, I would have classified as more of a retail investor. And I think, on my journey right now, I'm probably getting towards being more professional. But the reason why I bring it up is that without having the initial experience with my parents, I don't think I would have been able to see all these different avenues or areas within this particular area of investing that are important to know about. So sort of with that backdrop, then what happened was probably maybe pre-COVID, so 2018, 2019, I took probably about 8 to 12 months just to collect as much information and data as I could around multifamily investing across the country. So just going to different databases like StatsCan, CMHC, there was some larger realtor brokerages and banks that I had gone through in different reports in that context to get a better sense of some of the regional nuances across the country. And it was truly remarkable just to kind of see how much data there is out there. that can be very, very informative. But with that sort of in the background, it became clearer to me that I wasn't as keen on Ontario and BC and was a lot more focused on Alberta and Saskatchewan, kind of as you had mentioned. Some of the pieces that I think sort of on a very microscopic level, and then I'll kind of answer it on a macroscopic level too. But from a microscopic standpoint, the way that the Residential and Tenancy Act is enforced in different provinces is quite different. And I found that Alberta and Saskatchewan had a more efficient means of doing so. And sort of some common examples would be like if you were going through an eviction process in Ontario, at least back in 2018, 2019, 2020, it could be, months before you actually be able to get somebody to be able to be evicted to go through that process. Whereas in Alberta, it was significantly more streamlined. It could be sort of on the order of weeks. That'd be one sort of example how it's being enforced. Another way in terms of how the Tenant Residency Act was being enforced was on renewals of leases. In Ontario and BC, it's set very, very strictly based upon sort of what the rents were like before, and there's a percentage. Whereas in Alberta, it's more market force driven, and so those kind of came about as again more efficiencies that allowed sort of the market to dictate how things were going. And then I think maybe on the next piece, and just a more macro piece, was there's a business cycle or sort of that needs to flow through. So you need to have the ups and the downs. The recession has to occur, and I just felt that wasn't happening in Ontario and BC the same way as it was in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And so because they're more commodities-based environments, they tend to go through those cycles a bit more obviously. And without having those cycles occur, what I was noticing was in BC and Ontario, there was more focus on appreciation, less so on cash flow. And that just didn't sort of sit well for me in terms of what I was going to be trying to focus on. And then the other piece, and so as a function of that, then Alberta and Saskatchewan allowed more cash flow properties to be found a bit more readily. But the other piece too is that if you have a full cycle, you have to be prepared. So your balance sheet has to be structured in such a way that you can weather a downside, but also, and that's sort of one end of it, the bad end of it, you need to be quite prepared for that piece. But on the other side, when you go through the downside of the cycle, it provides a lot of opportunities for purchasing. And so it can really kind of on that upswing again, your portfolio can grow quite substantially. So you just have to be prepared for that a bit more. And so that cycle piece was, I think, also very important. So those kind of how things were being implemented sort of on a practical level, and then sort of the larger piece, those were what kind of drove me into those markets in Alberta and Saskatchewan more so.
Gwynn, thanks for that. That's really helpful. Can I ask, in terms of balancing appreciation versus cash flow, do you tilt more towards cash flow, or are you in general seeking more hybrid type investments? Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
I'd say cash flow is king.
Yeah, at least I figured you were going to say that.
Yeah, at least from the beginning. I mean, my focus is to try and find value add opportunities, either from an operational standpoint or from an actual CapEx standpoint. But at the end of the day, I don't want to buy something that's not cash flowing either on day one of purchase or very like weeks or months after being purchased. Okay. I'd say 6-month time horizon would be the longest I'd want it to be working. So it has to make sense for me from a cash flow standpoint. That's the biggest piece. Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned that your focus is in multifamily investing. Now, the sites and the properties that you tend to go for, how big are they? Are we talking more than the 4-plex, 5-plex? Like how big are these properties typically?
Yeah, so they're larger. So this kind of goes back to that whole idea of retail versus professional. I think as you start moving more and more into the professional side of things, you become a lot more comfortable with larger assets. It's the same, like in my mind, it's exactly the same amount of work. If you have a 2-plex or a duplex or 4-plex, versus having a 55-unit building, which is sort of the first one that we bought, it's all the same amount of work. You have to get the same standard operating procedures all put in place. So you might as well go larger. The only thing that I would say is a bit more unnerving is the mortgages that you're taking on are much larger, so you have to be a bit more comfortable with that. But in general, I would say the size of asset that we're looking at are going to be sort of within the 50-unit size. They typically are going to be multi-level. We try to find ones that have elevators in them as well, because we sort of have a set sort of tenant profile that we typically focus for. Yeah, so I'd say a little bit larger, or maybe medium size. Larger would be like 100+ units, but for me, medium sized, I'd say.
Before I go into my next question, I just want to comment on what you said about tenants and the processes that are in place in Alberta when compared to Ontario, because Gwynn, I can tell you that now for the first time, I am starting to experience tenant issues, and I am getting firsthand insight into how long it can take to deal with those processes in Ontario. So I think for people who are looking at investing directly into real estate themselves, it's really important to take a step back, educate ourselves on these matters, and think about what some of our risk mitigation strategies are and just what some of the roadblocks are that we can encounter. Because I'm an Ontario investor, and I think I've made it clear on the show that investing in real estate, it's overall been a worthwhile endeavor for me. But over time, when we learn about what really lights us up, I probably steer a little bit more towards investing in the markets and equities because that's just what resonates a little bit more with me. But your point about tenants, extremely important, and I'm glad you brought that up. Gwynn, I do want to get a sense of, can you comment on the size of your portfolio again? Like how many units do you have now? And then in terms of what is your long-term vision when it comes to scaling the portfolio? And you also touched on, you're also helping some other people on the side, but what are your long-term plans there? Would love to hear more.
Yeah. So the portfolio, like I said, was about 199 units at the moment. It's spread over 7 buildings. And we market-wise, it's all focused in Alberta. We are in Edmonton, Red Deer, Lethbridge, and Medicine Hat at the moment. And the focus really is not to develop any more beachheads within any other market within Alberta at this stage, but to maybe increase the presence we have in those particular markets. And the focus behind that is more so just from an operational standpoint. My sense is that we probably need to be somewhere on the order of about 150 to 200 units in a particular market for us to be able to develop our own sort of in-house property management. And at the moment, we're sort of spread between some self-managed with on-site superintendents and then some third-party managed. And it's just, being able to do the property management is just another avenue of income. And so being able to bring it all in-house makes a bit more sense. Yeah, I think in terms of the vision, so we've been very fortunate so far. We've basically used our own personal funds and a very small network of investor partners. I don't think at this stage we feel like we need to get outside funds to build what we're doing. And that being said, though, when I first decided that this was the path I wanted to go down, I spent a lot of time, back in 2018, 2019, just researching how other mutual fund trusts or sort of private REITs had developed themselves, read a lot of operating memorandums and perspectives for a lot of the companies here in Canada, just to understand sort of their natural history about how they developed. And so with that sort of in the background, I was able to be thoughtful about how we structured each of these projects so that they would be able to move into a mutual fund trust in the future if that's what we sort of wanted. And so, I don't think everything is there. All the groundwork is laid. And at some point in the future, if we feel like have grown enough and we need more capital, I think we'll probably move into that as sort of a piece. Another element I think that's maybe a bit more of the rate limiting step, not necessarily capital, is acquisition. So finding the actual projects that we want is taking a lot more time than I would like. And I think that's because, you've got to underwrite a lot of buildings before you find the one that's actually going to fit into that sort of category of what you want. Same way that when you go through your value investing component, you spend tons of time, I can only imagine, researching and going through all the different components before you finally decide and pull the trigger about making an acquisition. It's the same sort of process here. And in conjunction with that, what I would say is the thesis of going out to Western Canada, I think, has proven out quite well. We've been in that market now for about 6 years, and in the past 2.5, 3 years, there's been a massive amount of capital that's come from BC, Ontario, and Quebec into that market. And I think that is sort of a double-edged sword. Like, it's proving that the thesis has been an appropriate one to move out to that market, but it also means there are a lot more players coming in, and there's more people fighting for those same assets. And like a really quick example, so we there was a building or portfolio in Red Deer recently where it was about 100 units. We lost out to a group that paid cash.
Wow.
And we talked to the realtor afterwards to get feedback. Because as always, we want to try and find out like how we can improve sort of our offers in the future. And they're like, your offer was the one that would have been chosen, except you guys didn't want to pay in cash. I'm like, one day we'll probably have those funds. But just not at this stage. Yeah. But anyways, yeah. So there's lots that we've done to be prepared for sort of future taking in of capital, but we're not at that stage yet.
Gwynn, this is exciting stuff. Can you shed a little bit of light on what some of your value add strategies are? Like, I'm curious, the buildings that you buy, are they a little bit older? Are they due for renovations that in turn can help drive up the rental rates? Can you shed a bit of light on this?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a two-pronged approach, I should say. So we do have some like you're talking about, which are sort of capex value add, and they're more cosmetic sort of renovations, like on a unit level, which I think is pretty standard. But the other way that we try to approach things is more from an operational standpoint. So one of the more recent buildings we bought in Lethbridge wasn't sub-metered. So it was a 44 unit building that, the landlord previous to us was paying all the electricity utilities there. And so we sub-metered all of the units and were able to, I think I would say from recollection, it was probably about $30,000 to $35,000 a year for electricity, and we're probably down in the $15,000 to $18,000 range. So on the operational side of things, on the expense side of the ledger, we've probably dropped $15,000 to $20,000 off the budget on that side. So it's trying to find efficiencies in that context a bit more that we tend to focus on. But yeah, in addition to the traditional sort of value add piece as well.
Okay. Now, based on your experience investing out of province, can you just take us through some lessons, some do's, some don'ts for anybody who is contemplating something like this?
Yeah. So I think maybe the first place I would say is, as with any investment, you just have to make sure you're doing all your diligence and doing all the work and staying on top of it, like as with any type of investment. And as I think you've alluded to many times on your podcast, it's not a passive investment. So you just have to recognize that this is a lot more physically active, either your physical labor or somebody else's physical labor. But at the end of the day, you're sort of the quarterback that's going to be managing these things. So just being very conscientious of that. Then I think, so if I wasn't as familiar with Alberta as I am, so we lived there for just shy of 10 years, and I've worked all across Alberta just with the AME local program. But if you didn't know a market, I think I would be hesitant about moving into it until you've had a good bit of experience sort of managing things remotely yourself. So I think it would behoove you to become quite knowledgeable of the economic drivers within the area, but also to kind of understand it a bit more practically and tangibly. I think that's really important. And then remote managing is all about managing managers. So you just have to be comfortable knowing what it is you want them to do and to be able to describe that to them in a very effective way. So, a quick example would be the most recent acquisition we had was in Medicine Hat. That's a new market for us. So we spent a couple of months getting to know different property managers within that market. And then we decided upon one, started to develop that relationship. And 2 months before the acquisition, we were working with that person to understand what their style was, what their operating procedures were, to make sure that they would meld with ours. And then on day one, we knew what they were going to be doing and how we were going to approach it. And now we meet with them weekly until this building is stabilized. We're meeting with them every week just to kind of make sure that they understand and are conscious of the goals that we're trying to achieve. And I mean, that won't continue indefinitely. It'll go to sort of a monthly cadence, but the idea is that you need to understand your goals, you need to communicate them quite well, and they need to be checking it quite well just to make sure that things are being done in a fashion that you want and things stabilize the way you want them to.
Gwynn, traditional teaching has been that real estate investing can be worthwhile in an environment where there is inflation that's maybe a little bit higher than average. And I'm curious, based on your experience with what you've described so far, do you still see that to be the case?
Yeah. So, I mean, my general philosophy when it comes to investing is I like tangible assets. And I think that's one component. The next piece would be my macro view for Canada and probably for most of the globe is that inflation is not going away. I think we're still in the early innings of inflation. And so I believe that hard assets and physical assets will continue to be very positive in that environment moving forward. I think then the next piece I say just more practically is this may again, real estate is very nuanced in terms of there's regional components to it, but the ability for real estate to change the income that comes about from it and to be responsive to what's going on in the environment is very important. And I think that's a hedge against inflation. So as long as you're in markets where your rents can continue to grow with inflation and maybe not be as hampered as they could be in some other markets, I think that will continue to only be positive in that context.
Last question on real estate before we get to some really fun topics. Gwynn, what you've described sounds wonderful, but it does sound like a lot of work. And so I think sometimes I can tend to ask a lot about the mechanics of certain investments, and sometimes we forget to ask people about their why. And this may weave into the next topic, but What is your why when it comes to real estate investing?
I think it's, I haven't yet in my previous careers had a chance to grow a business.
Hmm.
And this is really an opportunity to be able to grow something that I envision my kids being able to step into at some point in the future. I'm kind of already grooming them at 7 and 8. Like same as your kids, like they've come to Alberta. They come with me. They go visit the buildings. It's a real family sort of piece. I mean, my dad, my siblings, we're all sort of have that bug. And so we all, we all feel very passionate about this particular type of investing. But it really is the build. There's so many cool aspects to this. And I say that, I mean, a bit tongue in cheek, because I want to say this piece. It is a full-time job. Like medicine is a full-time job and this is a full-time job because there's just so many elements to it. But I feel really lit up by it. This is the only way to sort of describe it. Yeah.
I love to hear that. And the point on kids is, Gwynn, kids will see as they do. And so maybe I'll just put a little selfish plug here. My youngest, he recently created a YouTube channel. He got really interested by all of it. And so his YouTube channel,
That's lovely.
it's called World Master Z, and it's basically focused on history and geography of the world. Like he just went reading as many books on world history. He loves to learn about things like World War I, World War II, the Titanic, what happened. So this is his little thing. So if anyone wants to check it out for their kids, if you have curious kids, which I'm sure you do, World Master Z. Now, Gwynn, back to your kids and your family. I think the last time we talked, you said you were thinking about things like intergenerational wealth. And I'm sure that real estate fits into that conversation somewhere. But on that topic of estate planning, intergenerational wealth, can you just touch on some of the things that you've been thinking about?
Yeah. So I think maybe where I'd start is I think we're super fortunate as physicians that, as soon as we graduate, we have an ability to pay off, all of our debts, and then we start to accumulate assets. I think we're in a very comfortable position. And so because we're in a comfortable position, then the next question becomes, and again, I'm kind of generalizing. This is how I feel about myself, but I kind of view our profession this way. And as long as we have our insurance kind of put in place properly, I don't think we're ever going to be in a situation where we're going to want for much. I think we're super financially stable. So it's sort of where the first piece. Then the question for me becomes, if I continue to accumulate assets, like why am I doing that? What's that for? And for me, when I answer that question, it's for my kids, it's for my grandkids that aren't even born yet, and it's for the betterment of my immediate and surrounding community. And so when I start to think about things in that context, it automatically becomes sort of a longer horizon than just sort of myself. Mm-hmm. And then when I meet with professionals, be they accountants or lawyers or tax planners or financial planners, a lot of my thinking then ends up being, and strategizing with them is, it's not just for my own life, it's for how do I think about this on a longer time horizon and set priorities that are not just for me, but are for my kids and for my community. And so a lot of it goes into, a lot of the thoughts, the thinking that I have goes into it from that sort of length scale and that kind of lens. And maybe more practically, like some examples of this. So, when we opened up our kids' RESPs, we were in the fortunate situation that we had some extra capital on the personal side of things. So we kind of front end loaded our RESP and kind of oversubscribed to it a bit more, just kind of feeling that compounding would be better for them in the future.
For sure.
And maybe another example would be sort of, I feel quite strongly about permanent life insurance policies. And so we have those sort of structured throughout our portfolio, but we ended up getting those on our kids. And we did that because, we feel that that's another vehicle to have tax-free growth within that policy, but the kids will be able to borrow against those cash surrender values in the future. And then, when at some point in the future, our kids pass on, that'll be a gift that'll go to their sort of grandkids. So there's like lots of little things in that context that we're thinking about. Another one would be, so these days, our investment vehicle is our holding company. That's where sort of most of our wealth is held, because we're so actively growing our real estate portfolio that we envision that the assets inside that particular vehicle will grow. And my wife and I don't want those just to be ours. We want those to be our kids, and we have some other beneficiaries too that we're thinking about. So we're trying to move that into a family trust so that wealth can be, or not wealth, but the growth can be attributed to everybody within that's part of the family trust. So just lots of kind of thinking in that context. And why I think where you have to be really conscientious about this is, and again, this might just be my own personal experience, but most of the financial professionals that we deal with don't think about sort of the longer term stuff until you're later in your career. But
Mm,
I don't see, there's no reason to not think about it now.
mm.
You can just structure things in a way that's going to be just as advantageous for you right now, but also be more advantageous for the sort of family and the other community that are around you as well in the longer term.
Wow, Gwynn, that was quite the answer. I can see the wheels in motion. Like you just covered so many areas under that financial literacy umbrella. You just talked about real estate, insurance. You talked about estate planning, trusts. That was incredible. Okay, but it's nice to hear about your why. One thing I did forget to ask you about, Gwynn, you mentioned that real estate investing actively out of province can be akin to a full-time job. And I'm just curious, have you had to scale back in medicine a little bit to make room for both?
Yeah, it's been a function of scaling back, but it's also been a function of realizing that I cannot do everything myself and sort of being open to hiring people. So I have I have a virtual assistant that helps quite extensively and sort of offloading more and more onto them,
Okay.
or bookkeeping would be another example. I think it's becoming less doing everything myself and being in the day-to-day trenches and more getting other professionals to kind of help me to build out that business as well.
Okay. Gwen, I really want to pivot to this is going to be exciting. You also had time to enjoy a 1 year sabbatical and you were in Valencia, Spain with your family. Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that experience and maybe we can start off with why did you want to do this?
Yeah, we were very fortunate. I think from a timing standpoint, it was a really opportune piece for us. But let's see why. I would say so. My wife and I traveled quite a lot, not just traveled, but lived abroad quite a lot.
Mhm.
And I think we had not lost it, but it was probably 8 years prior to that that we hadn't done any sort of new cultural immersions. And so it was really an opportunity to get into that again, to see how our family could navigate that type of challenge in a new setting. That was sort of one of the bigger pieces. Then, in conjunction with that, I would say we really wanted the kids to have a new language, and we thought, and my thinking or our thinking was that Spanish is such a diverse
Mhm.
language, or not diverse, but like it's spoken in many different countries throughout the world. That it was a nice opportunity for that to happen as well. That was sort of from the family side, and then maybe more personally, I had gotten to a stage where I was feeling quite burnt out, and this was probably a realization 2 years before we left that was there. And it really manifested in sort of empathy at home, like,
Mm.
getting off shift. And I think I was kind of off kilter for that day and the next day. And really just feeling like the empathy for my family wasn't there, that I was using all of that up at work and feeling like quite drained. And so that was a big push, I think, from a clinical standpoint to want to move on. Yeah, those are kind of be the two big drivers, I would say.
Maybe talk about some of the highlights during your year away and some of the things that you guys learned as a group.
Yeah, I would say resiliency as a family unit was huge. Like we had no idea how anyone was going to do. And it was, I mean, three quarters of the group didn't speak any Spanish at all. So it was quite a difference. But yeah, I would say resiliency. That was a big one. I'm really proud. The kids did. It was a tough transition, and they did such an amazing job. So that was beautiful to sort of see, and to see them grow there, and for us to grow as well. The other piece too is it really affirmed my sense that my wife Julie is the perfect partner for me. Like
Oh, wow, that's beautiful.
I knew that before, but it was tough. Like it was a tough year, and she was so supportive, and I think we grew a lot in that context. That it was just really a lot of affirmations that came through this experience, I would say. Yeah.
I love to hear stuff like that. And one thing I'm also hearing is many of our colleagues in different areas of medicine, they are doing sabbaticals. And of course, you have to have a group that you're working with that is supportive of this too. But for anybody who is considering embarking on a 1 year adventure abroad, any advice for them, Gwynn? Any questions that they should really be asking themselves before doing this?
Yeah. I think I'd say this. I think a lot of these answers, my thoughts would be kiddo focused. Kids are malleable for sure, but the transition, especially going to a country where there's no real connection in your family already, and maybe where there's a language barrier, that was a real tumultuous time for probably 4 to 5 months, I would say. So just realizing that, you're probably, and again, I'm speaking for myself, I should say, from this context, we were doing because I was feeling burnt out, and maybe I had an expectation that it was going to be a real breeze just to go somewhere else and feel like a vacation. We didn't start off that way initially. It became that, but just making sure that you're aware that there's going to be a lot of transitional components that can be challenging. Let me think. I would say, you know what I would say? Because the initial part was so challenging, 2 years is better than one.
Yeah.
And more so because, you get over the transition 4 to 5 months in, things are
Yeah.
good for, 4 or 5 months. Then you're starting to think about having to go home again. So that last couple of months, or you're just kind of transitioning back. So having a little bit more time, if your group is supportive, would be, I think, absolutely amazing. So if
Yeah.
you can extend it a bit longer. And then, and maybe a practical one I would say is there's a lot of emphasis on maybe choosing a relocation specialist that sort of help you navigate that process.
Mhm.
I don't know that the cost benefit of that, I think, wasn't really worth it for us. The only reason why we ended up using someone was we had immigration lawyer that we worked with just because we wanted Julie to get a longer sort of residency visa. But I think aside from that, it's not. There's so many resources online that if you have a little bit of time to put into it, I think it's probably better to put that time in yourself and kind of understand things than trying to get someone else to do it for you.
Okay. Now, you were based in Valencia, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, that's right.
And I imagine that you probably traveled a little bit throughout Europe too. Were there any destinations that really stood out to you that you really enjoyed?
I'm a massive Liverpool fan, so
Okay.
so Liverpool is a huge place to go. Yeah, I would say other than that, we didn't, we went back to Ireland as well for a period of time just because there's a lot of heritage that was there. And those were sort of that was it. It was really, we spent most of our time in Spain and just being as immersed as possible. And we only spent 2 weeks in Ireland on our way back. But otherwise it was just immersion in Spain and feeling very thankful for that opportunity. And another plug, what I would say is Valencia was an absolutely amazing city, just for lots of different reasons. But it felt so safe. We never felt insecure there. And we had spent a little bit of time in Madrid, a little bit of time in Barcelona, got robbed in both. But
Oh
that's a different
man,
story.
no way. Hey,
Maybe it's a rite of passage.
speaking of resiliency, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But we would wholeheartedly recommend Valencia. It was a beautiful, beautiful place to be. Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned Liverpool, so fun little stat here. I was born in the UK. I was born in Kent, and
Yes.
my oldest son is really into soccer. So I was doing a bit of research as to which English Premier League team was closest situated to my place of birth, and it turns out that it's Crystal Palace. So I'm still trying to get my
Great.
Crystal Palace
Yes.
jersey. So
Yes.
I've told my son that that's going to be my team. Hopefully,
You
I'll have
picked
to
a
learn a
bad
bit more
time
about
though.
them. I know.
They're having a really bad season, but
Yeah,
that's
they are. They are. It's been a bit of a struggle. But hey, Gwen, like I say, everything. I've been
That's right.
a lifelong Penguins fan. Everything is cyclical. You have to ride the highs and the lows, and you have to stick through the lows to get back to those highs. Now, going back to Spain, did your kids do school there as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We thought we would try and make it as hard as possible for them. And we put them right into a public Spanish school.
Okay.
So there was minimal English, if any. And it wasn't just Spanish, but they're Valenciano, which was the dialect within the province that we were in. They were sort of immersed within that as well.
Yeah.
And I think we were really fortunate. I guess maybe fortunate, but not. Maybe the kids won't look at that in retrospect as fortune, but the school that they went to it had lots of immigrants from across North Africa, Asia,
Really?
from Eastern Europe as well. And so there was lots of kids that were all struggling together. But yeah, it was amazing. I mean, the expat community there is also quite beautiful, but I think I would say maybe not universally, but pretty much the majority of expats put their kids into private schools, which are fine, but they would have been limited exposure to Spanish, and we really wanted the Spanish language to be a big piece for their experience.
Okay. My wife and older son, they just returned from Barcelona a few nights ago. My son was there on a soccer excursion, and they absolutely love the city. And I was trying to live vicariously through them. I was studying the map of Spain, and then I came down south to Valencia, and I was like, wow, this would make for a wonderful time away. They loved their trip. And Gwynn, you having spent so much time there, I wanted to ask you, if there's one way of living life in Spain that you could just bring over to where you are today, bring back to North America, what would that be?
So there's this real social fabric component that I loved, which was the bringing of food and kids together just everywhere. So it didn't matter what style of restaurant you went. Like it could have been the nicest restaurant possible, or it could have just been like a side of the street type of vendor. Kids were just welcome everywhere at all restaurants. And
Oh, wow.
the other piece too that really speaks to this is most of the restaurants that we found were all around almost like they were built around a playground. Like it was a plaza and the restaurants would be around the plaza. So like you would go and you would spend more time than you would typically spend in North America. You could be 2 or 3 hours at a restaurant. People didn't bat an eye. That was totally normal. The kids would be in playing, eating, out again. Like there was just this real integration of kids almost in all aspects of life that I think were a little bit different, but it was very noticeable than here in North America, but it was very noticeable in that particular arena. Like I would say just how kids are integrated to the restaurant experience was really beautiful.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Now, Gwynn, you've done many things, you wear many hats, and I want to ask you, for you, what does success look like in life?
I think I feel like I don't know. I feel like I've achieved that for myself, sort of personally right now. I think with our family as well, we feel very, very comfortable. I mean, I still want to continue to grow our real estate business, but I sort of have a bit of a more my main focus at the moment is trying to develop or think through a way to have MD Management 2.0 come about for Canadian physicians. Like I felt really, I'm not sure how to describe it, maybe sad, maybe a bit frustrated that left. I didn't use MD Management all that much, but it was one of the first places where I got any financial education. And so I feel very grateful for that. Mm-hmm. But I think that there's maybe something either provincially or nationally or territorially that has to be within the country that could maybe focus physicians' well-being when it comes to finances. And I just think about how there are amazing pension funds in Canada, and like the teachers one here in Ontario is just an amazing example. But just being able to structure something that has that level of focus and care for physicians, I think would be amazing. I don't have like a vision for what that looks like because I'm still sort of trying to think it through. But I think that that's a real big focus for a lot of my thinking at the moment. And maybe something I might ask of your audience is, I would love to try and understand more of like the natural history behind why MD Management developed, how it became attached to the CMA. And just understanding that a bit more. And I haven't been able to find anything. So if there's people who have either personal history or know people, I would love to understand how we could look at that and learn a bit more about it. And around that, what I was going to say was there are so many amazing individuals just like yourself and, you know, the Looney doctor, the two physicians from
Paul and Jane.
Yeah, Paul and Jane, my apologies. Yeah. And then physician empowerment with Kevin and Wing. There's like so many great people, and not that anyone's working in silos. That's not where I'm going to go with it, but it does feel a bit disparate. And I want to find some way to maybe have it come together in something that's more tangible, something that was like MD Management. And that's not to take away from any of the fantastic work that all these individuals are doing, but yeah, there's just something there that I think could come about, and I would love to help to be part of how to foster that and help grow that. It would be something
that is really interesting, Gwynn. And then the other two people, I'll just give a shout out to, because they're friends and colleagues, Steph Zhao and Matt Pointer. Like you said, Gwynn, there are many people out there doing wonderful, wonderful work and having an impact in so many ways to better the lives of all our colleagues. And it's really nice to know that there are people like you out there who are thinking about this. Well, is there something that could happen to unite things and make that impact even more powerful? Maybe there's going to be synergy, but those are incredible thoughts, Gwynn. And anything else that you want to leave us with today as we wind things down?
No, that sounds lovely. I really appreciate it. This has been awesome to talk to you.
It's been a lot of fun for me too.
Yeah. I think what I would say is I wish you all the best with your continued success, both within this particular platform that you have, and also your teaching, be sort of beyond sort of the residence, but also the recent course that you put out as well, because I know you've worked really, really hard on that. And it's been a real pleasure and honor and to be part of this awesome experience that you're putting together.
Thanks so much for that, Gwynn. I really enjoyed talking to you today. I always love to talk to you and understand the things that you're thinking about. And thanks again for making time for us.
Thank you.
And one person I forgot to give a shout out to in the conversation, my friend, Dr. Kieran Nair, who runs the Financially Free MD newsletter. I encourage you all to check that out. And speaking of newsletters, the Beyond MD newsletter is now alive and well. I just released the second issue last week. You can check it out, beyondmdpodcast.ca, and just hit the newsletter tab and you can subscribe. I am taking a bit of a break with the kids on March break, but I will be back at it very shortly. Until next time, we'll see you in 3 weeks. Stay well, stay savvy.